On a distant planet known as Yalora, where towering crystalline trees sparkled under the twin suns, humans had established a small outpost. Humanity's interactions with alien civilizations were still relatively new, and every encounter was a delicate balance of diplomacy, curiosity, and, occasionally, bewildering misunderstandings. Jake Marlowe, a human engineer in his early 30s, was one of the few brave individuals chosen to live and work in these alien territories, fixing machinery, training locals in basic technology, and ensuring the outpost remained operational. Jake was an unassuming figure, short-cropped hair, a wiry build, and an ever-present grin. His closest friend on Yalora was Tarek, a local alien from the Shelek race, who had taken to Jake's quirky sense of humor and endless fascination with human technology. While Tarek's people valued quiet contemplation and intricate artistry, Jake's easygoing attitude and straightforward way of solving problems were refreshing, albeit occasionally mystifying. One warm afternoon, Jake received a request to travel to a nearby settlement where the machinery in their solar energy array had begun malfunctioning. Slinging his toolkit over his shoulder, Jake met Tarek by the settlement gate. "Another solar array, huh?" Jake said, glancing up at the shimmering glass-like panels. "Let's see if we can't get this baby back up and running." As they walked through the settlement, Jake noticed the curious glances cast his way. The Shelek were a tall, slender species with dark, iridescent skin that shimmered in shades of blue and green. Their large, reflective eyes, sensitive to light, were a constant reminder to Jake that humans were quite literally an alien presence here. Jake pulled out his toolkit and began setting up. The toolkit was an assortment of wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, a multi-tool, and a hammer, standard for any engineer back on Earth. But the Shelek seemed utterly transfixed by each item, their large eyes widening in awe with every tool he pulled out. "What are these?" murmured one of the elder Shelek who had come to observe. "They're tools," Jake replied with a friendly smile. "You know, for fixing stuff. Like this array here." He tapped one of the solar panels with the back of a wrench, making a reassuring metallic clink. One of the young Shelek flinched, eyes wide. "Such power in one object," he whispered to another, who nodded solemnly. Jake chuckled. "Power? Nah, it's just a wrench. Pretty standard, actually." However, Jake's words seemed to do little to quell their growing unease. As he moved to another part of the array, holding a screwdriver, the Shelek watched with hushed whispers, interpreting every movement as a demonstration of skill and mastery over some mysterious Earth weaponry. Jake's routine gestures, tightening bolts, adjusting screws, and hammering loose panels back into place, only served to amplify their perception that he wielded an arsenal of sophisticated, multifunctional weapons. Tarek, noticing the murmurs and uneasy glances, tried to reassure his kin, but even he found it hard to explain the purpose of each tool. From a Shelek's perspective, the sheer variety and precision of the instruments Jake used suggested they were not mere tools but finely crafted weapons, each designed for a unique purpose. As the crowd grew, Jake started noticing the wide-eyed expressions and quiet murmurs spreading. What had started as a friendly repair job had turned into a spectacle. He decided to lean into it, a glint of mischief in his eyes. With a dramatic flourish, he pulled out his hammer and gave the panel a good whack to secure it back in place. Gasps erupted from the crowd. "Whoa, easy there," he said, chuckling. "It's just a hammer. See?" He demonstrated by tapping it lightly against his palm. But the demonstration only added to the awe. The hammer's impact had sounded almost thunderous in the quiet settlement, and Jake's casual handling of it made it appear even more potent. The crowd began to whisper, and Jake overheard snippets. "It's as if he controls the power of storms. No wonder the humans are so powerful, their weapons are versatile beyond imagination." Jake couldn't help but laugh, but when he glanced at Tarek, he saw concern in his friend's eyes. "Jake, I don't think they understand," Tarek whispered, his voice low. "They're just tools, Tarek," Jake replied, amused but sensing the growing tension around him. "Nothing more. Maybe on Earth, Tarek said, casting a worried look at the gathering crowd. But to the Shelek, each of those items seems like a unique weapon. We don't have anything comparable in form or function. As Jake continued his work, he noticed the crowd had swelled, and there was a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere around him. The murmurs grew more animated, and a few Shelek elders exchanged dark glances. Some looked fearful, others simply curious. For them, the human toolkit was a terrifying, unknown arsenal, each item holding hidden, potentially devastating power. One of the Shelek council members approached Tarek, his gaze fixed warily on Jake. Is it wise to allow a human to carry such instruments? Tarek hesitated, glancing at Jake. They're not weapons, Elder Zarin. I assure you, they're harmless. Harmless? Elder Zarin's eyes narrowed as he watched Jake wield a spanner with ease. These tools have potential far beyond our comprehension. How do we know he will not use them against us? Realizing he was inadvertently creating a tense atmosphere, Jake decided to demonstrate in simpler terms. He held up each tool, explaining its use in layman's terms, hoping to alleviate their fears. This here is just a screwdriver. Helps tighten or loosen screws. He twisted it in the air, mimicking a motion. And this, he held up a wrench, is for gripping and turning things, like pipes or bolts. Each explanation, however, only seemed to add to the mystique, as if his words were cryptic incantations hiding deeper truths. No matter how much he tried to assure them, their suspicions seemed to grow. Finally, after securing the last panel, Jake gave a final, reassuring smile to the crowd. All done. Nothing dangerous, just some good old-fashioned repairs. Yet, the Shelek were not easily swayed. Whispers persisted, and as Jake packed up his toolkit, he sensed that the crowd's awe and fear had only grown stronger. His tools, simple objects on Earth, had become symbols of unknown power on Yalora, and no amount of explanation seemed capable of quelling the rumors spreading through the settlement. As Jake and Tarek began their journey back to the human outpost, Tarek shook his head, troubled. I'm afraid they'll only see your toolkit as more mysterious now, Jake. They think it holds unimaginable power. Jake chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Well, at least they'll think twice before borrowing it, huh? But Tarek's gaze was serious. Be careful, my friend. The Shelek fear what they don't understand. And right now, to them, you're holding a hidden arsenal. Jake looked back at the settlement, realizing his light-hearted demonstration might have set off a chain of misunderstandings. As Jake and Tarek returned to the human outpost, the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his demonstration had stirred up far more than he intended. What had seemed like a harmless display of engineering now seemed to have transformed into a spectacle of human power in the eyes of the Shelek. The following days were anything but calm. Rumors began to swirl around the settlement, whispers of the human arsenal that Jake wielded so casually. Some Shelek spoke of him in reverent tones, calling him the human weapon keeper, while others regarded him with fear and suspicion. The Shelek Council even held an emergency meeting to discuss the implications of these human weapons on their peaceful settlement. One morning, Tarek came to Jake with a grim expression. Jake, the council has requested an audience with you. Jake raised an eyebrow, surprised. Me? Why? They want to understand your toolkit better, Tarek explained. They believe it's essential to their security. Jake felt a wave of apprehension. But it's just a bunch of tools. How can I make them understand? Tarek hesitated, his eyes downcast. I think they're afraid, Jake. They don't know what to expect from you or your kind, and this toolkit represents a power they've never encountered. Reluctantly, Jake agreed to meet with the council. He arrived at their meeting hall, a vast, crystalline structure with walls that shimmered and reflected the twin suns' light. As he entered, he could feel the intensity of the council members' gazes. They regarded him with a mixture of awe and caution, their faces impassive yet their eyes betraying their curiosity and apprehension. Elder Zarin, the council leader, stepped forward. Human Jake, he began, his voice solemn, we have heard much about the tools you carry, tools that have stirred both admiration and fear among our people. Jake took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. Elder Zarin, I understand that my toolkit might seem strange to you, but I assure you, these tools are for practical purposes only. I'm just here to help repair and maintain your settlement's equipment. Zarin's eyes narrowed slightly. And yet, these tools can bend metal, tighten bonds, and create sounds of thunder. Your hammer alone struck fear into the hearts of our people. Jake held up his hammer with a slight smile. It's a hammer, Elder. Where I come from, it's used to drive nails, shape metal, or make minor repairs. The council members murmured amongst themselves, casting uneasy glances at the hammer as if it were a magical scepter. Elder Zarin's expression softened, but he remained cautious. If what you say is true, then show us, human Jake. Demonstrate the purpose of each item. Convince us that these are not weapons. Seeing no other choice, Jake began to methodically pull out each tool, explaining its purpose in simple terms. He showed them how a wrench gripped pipes, how a screwdriver fit into a screw, and even demonstrated the multi-tool's various gadgets. As he went through the motions, he saw the council members' expressions gradually shift from suspicion to reluctant understanding. Yet, some of the council members remained skeptical. These items may not be weapons, but their potential for harm cannot be ignored, muttered one elder. In the wrong hands, they could cause great damage. Jake looked around, seeing the apprehension that still lingered. Elder, I understand your concerns, but you have my word, I came here in peace. My only goal is to help and learn from your people. The council seemed somewhat appeased, and the tension in the room eased. But just as Jake thought he'd managed to defuse the situation, a loud, panicked shout echoed through the hall. A Shelek guard burst in, his eyes wide with fear. Elders! There's a disturbance near the settlement's western boundary. A group from the neighboring clan is demanding entry, claiming we harbor dangerous human weaponry. The council members exchanged alarmed glances, and Zarin turned to Jake, his expression grave. Human Jake, it appears your toolkit has drawn unwanted attention from outside our settlement. Jake's heart sank. I never meant for this to happen. Elder Zarin placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. Come with us. If they fear these tools, perhaps it's time to show them the truth. Reluctantly, Jake followed the council and the guard to the western boundary, where a group of tall, fierce-looking Shelek from a neighboring clan stood with distrustful glares. Their leader, a broad-shouldered Shelek with a scar across his face, sneered as Jake approached. So, this is the human with the arsenal, he scoffed, his eyes filled with hostility. Our spies speak of your tools, human. Tools that can bend metal, strike thunder, and reshape our world. Jake held up his empty hands in a placating gesture. These tools are for repairs, not for harm. I assure you, I mean no threat. The leader's eyes narrowed. Words mean little to us, human. Show us these harmless tools, or we will treat you as the weapon bearer you claim not to be. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Jake reluctantly opened his toolkit, once again demonstrating each tool's purpose. Yet, his efforts seemed to do little to ease the tension. Just then, one of the young Shelek from the settlement, who had witnessed Jake's work on the solar array, stepped forward, courage in his gaze. I saw the human fix our machines with those tools. They are not weapons. They are instruments of creation, not destruction. The neighboring clan leader scowled, but he was clearly taken aback by the young Shelek's boldness. The other members of the settlement began to gather, murmuring in agreement. The situation shifted as voices from the crowd grew louder, speaking up in defense of Jake's intentions. The leader of the neighboring clan looked around, sensing his influence slipping. Reluctantly, he nodded, giving Jake a final glare. Perhaps we will observe, for now. But remember, human, we will be watching. As the neighboring clan departed, Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He looked around at the crowd of Shellac who had come to support him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He hadn't expected to find allies among them, but their willingness to speak up on his behalf was a reminder that understanding could bridge even the widest of cultural gaps. Tarek approached him, relief in his eyes. "You handled that well, Jake." Jake gave a wry smile. "Well, it wasn't exactly how I planned on spending my day, but I'm glad it didn't come to blows." Elder Zarin stepped forward, his expression warm but contemplative. "You have shown patience, human Jake. Patience and restraint in the face of fear and misunderstanding. Perhaps, over time, we can come to see these tools for what they truly are." Jake nodded, feeling a newfound respect for the Shellac and the delicate balance of trust he was beginning to build with them. The days following the confrontation at the boundary were tense but hopeful. The neighboring clan kept a watchful distance, wary yet seemingly dissuaded from immediate hostility. Meanwhile, word of Jake's toolkit continued to spread, reaching more settlements across the planet. He could feel the weight of responsibility growing as more Shellac began to view him as a strange enigma, a human capable of both creation and, in their eyes, potential destruction. Jake focused on his work, repairing machinery and helping maintain the settlement's technology, hoping that consistent action would speak louder than any explanation. He became somewhat of a celebrity among the Shellac, with children trailing behind him, fascinated by his mystical tools. At first, he tried to brush off their attention, but eventually, he embraced their curiosity, explaining the purpose of each tool and even teaching them simple repairs. One evening, as he was finishing a particularly difficult solar panel repair, Tarek approached him with a concerned expression. "Jake, I've heard unsettling rumors. Some in the neighboring clans are beginning to see you as a threat, a potential weapon, even if you're not actively using one." Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead, frowning. "I was afraid of this. Is there anything we can do to convince them otherwise?" Tarek hesitated. "Perhaps, if we could organize a demonstration, something that would show the true nature of your tools. But there's a problem. Clan leaders who are more traditional see any form of demonstration as a display of power, a threat." A new idea dawned on Jake as he glanced at his toolkit. "What if we held a gathering, something open to all, to show them that these tools are meant for peace and creation? We could include demonstrations, but also invite them to try things themselves." Tarek's eyes brightened. "It's bold, Jake, but it might just work. It would take planning, though. We'd need to ensure that it doesn't seem like a spectacle or a challenge." They began organizing what they called a Day of Understanding. Jake worked with Tarek to draft messages to nearby clans, inviting them to witness and participate in a shared event that would bridge cultural gaps through a series of non-threatening displays and collaborative projects. They included instructions to come unarmed and with an open mind, hoping to dispel any concerns that this was a show of force. As the day approached, Jake felt both nervous and determined. The morning of the gathering dawned bright, with a crowd of Shellac gathering around an open field near the settlement. Jake had set up several workstations, each one displaying a different tool from his kit and demonstrating a task it was designed to handle. Some tables were for metal bending, others for precision tasks like circuit adjustments, and a few for handling raw materials with delicate tools. The atmosphere was tense at first. Shellac leaders eyed him with suspicion, their guards lingering nearby, eyes fixed on the toolkit as if it contained hidden powers. But Jake kept his focus steady, beginning each demonstration with a simple, calm explanation. As he showed how the hammer could shape metal plates for shelters or how the screwdriver could adjust complex circuits, the crowd's initial wariness began to shift. He invited anyone interested to try using the tools. Hesitantly, a few brave Shellac stepped forward, handling the tools with cautious curiosity. Jake showed them how to grip the tools properly, sharing tips and tricks for easier use. Bit by bit, the Shellac's unease softened into something closer to fascination. Midway through the gathering, an unexpected group arrived, the skeptical leaders from the neighboring clan. Jake noticed them immediately, their leader from the earlier confrontation, his face unreadable as he watched from a distance. Tarek approached Jake and whispered. They were reluctant, but they came. Jake took a deep breath. That's a start. To make the gathering more interactive, Jake introduced collaborative activities. He organized teams of Shalek to work on small repair projects, guiding them as they used his tools under his supervision. The Shalek, typically independent, found themselves working side by side, passing tools to one another and learning from Jake's patient explanations. At one point, an elderly Shalek woman approached Jake with a broken device. This belonged to my father, she explained. We have not been able to make it work for years. Jake examined it, a small, intricate mechanical device with parts he could barely recognize. He spent a few minutes adjusting it, and, after a few deft turns and careful calibration, the device whirred to life. The old woman's face lit up with joy, and a murmur of awe rippled through the crowd. To the Shalek, it was as if he had revived something from beyond. As evening approached, a hush fell over the crowd. The leader of the skeptical clan stepped forward, his eyes narrow as he studied Jake. Human, he called, his voice echoing across the field. Do you claim that all of these actions, all of this, is only creation? Can you promise that nothing you wield holds the power of destruction? Jake stepped forward, meeting the leader's gaze without flinching. I can't deny that these tools have the potential to harm if used with that intent. But I came here in peace. Everything I've shown you today was to help, to build, to create. The power of these tools lies in how they're used, not in what they are. The leader looked skeptical, but as he gazed around at the gathered crowd, the Shalek working side by side, repairing small items and sharing stories, his expression softened slightly. He turned to his own people, addressing them with a low but carrying voice. It seems, there is truth in what the human says. Perhaps it is not the tool that carries danger, but the mind that wields it. With those words, he turned and began to walk away, his people following him in silence. It wasn't a declaration of acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. As the crowd dispersed, Tarek approached Jake with a wide grin. You did it. I think you've planted a seed today, Jake. They may still fear, but they've seen another side of humanity. Jake exhaled, feeling the weight of the day lift slightly. I hope it's enough. Over the next few days, the settlement buzzed with talk of the gathering. Shalek who had attended shared stories with those who hadn't, describing the strange yet fascinating tools and the peaceful demonstrations they had witnessed. Jake's reputation grew, and more Shalek sought him out, bringing broken items or simply stopping by to watch him work. But Jake knew he couldn't let his guard down. Though the event had been successful, he sensed that the tension with the neighboring clan still lingered beneath the surface. He and Tarek continued to work on strengthening ties with other clans, organizing smaller gatherings, and inviting more Shalek to learn basic repair skills. One night, as he sat by the fire with Tarek, reflecting on the day's events, a figure approached their camp. It was the skeptical clan leader, his expression shadowed in the firelight. I have come with a proposal, the leader said. You may continue to use your creations within your settlement. But if there is even a whisper of misuse, if these tools become weapons, we will not hesitate to protect our own. Jake met his gaze, sensing both the warning and the cautious respect in the leader's words. You have my word. These tools are only for creation, never for harm. The leader nodded once, accepting Jake's answer. With that, he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Jake and Tarek to ponder the fragile peace they had forged. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give them hope. The Shalek's acceptance of Jake's tools grew slowly but steadily, and as the days passed, Jake found himself becoming an unexpected bridge between two cultures. Though he knew the journey was far from over, he was determined to keep building that bridge, one tool, one conversation, and one act of trust at a time. The uneasy truce between Jake's settlement and the skeptical clan leader held, but Jake knew it was fragile. Days passed without incident, and he used the time to deepen his connections with the Shalek, patiently teaching them more about the tools they had once feared. Though he earned the trust of many, whispers of mistrust still lingered, and he felt the weight of every glance, every cautious look thrown his way by those who weren't yet convinced. Then, one morning, the settlement was shaken by news that a nearby clan had been attacked. It was a neighboring group, allies of the skeptical clan leader, and they had suffered heavy losses from a mysterious force, leaving buildings in ruins and several Shelek injured. The Shelek believed it was a rogue faction from a distant tribe, but the lack of evidence made suspicions fester, and distrust rose like smoke through the settlement. Jake knew that this incident could jeopardize everything he had worked for. If his toolkit, once a symbol of creation, was now associated with an impending threat, it could reignite the fears that had nearly torn apart the alliance. He turned to Tarek and some of the other leaders he had won over, proposing a plan. "What if we helped them rebuild?" Jake suggested. "If we could reach out and show our support, maybe we could show them once more that these tools aren't for destruction but for renewal." The idea was met with mixed reactions. Some of the Shelek leaders hesitated, concerned that the skeptical clan might see this as an intrusion, while others saw the wisdom in offering aid. After much debate, it was agreed that Jake, Tarek, and a few trusted Shelek from the settlement would travel to the devastated clan with supplies and offer their assistance. The journey was tense. As they approached the ravaged settlement, they were greeted by suspicious, wary eyes. Jake felt the weight of his toolkit slung over his shoulder and the significance it held. With each step into the camp, he noticed the destruction that lay before him, homes reduced to rubble, their structures torn apart, belongings scattered and broken. The skeptical clan leader emerged from the crowd, his gaze hard and unreadable. "Why have you come here, human?" His voice carried the edge of distrust that hadn't fully abated since their last meeting. Jake stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We heard what happened, and we came to help. My tools aren't for harm, only for building and mending. Let me and my friends aid you in rebuilding what was lost." The leader studied Jake for a long moment, his gaze flickering between the human's determined expression and the toolkit. Slowly, he nodded. "Very well. But know this, any harm brought to my people will not go unanswered." Jake nodded, accepting the terms without question. He and his team set to work immediately, guided by the wounded Shelek who pointed out the structures needing urgent repairs. Under Jake's careful instruction, they used the tools to clear debris, hammer frames back into place, and restore the structures that could be saved. Every action was deliberate, each repair a quiet message of solidarity and peace. As they worked, a group of Shelek children watched from a distance, eyes wide with curiosity and awe. Jake could feel their gaze on him, sensing their amazement at the transformation happening before them. With each repaired wall and each reconstructed structure, the tension began to dissolve, replaced by a tentative respect and understanding. When night fell, the camp held a subdued gathering around a central fire. The skeptical clan leader approached Jake once more, his expression softened, though he retained a guarded tone. "You have helped us today. But I still wonder, human, why do you risk so much for a people who have shown you so little trust?" Jake thought for a moment, looking around at the Shelek gathered in gratitude, their faces softened by the firelight. "Because trust isn't built overnight," he replied quietly. "It takes time, patience, and actions that speak louder than words. I came here hoping to build a bridge, not just for us but for what humanity and your people can achieve together." The leader looked at Jake for a long time, as if weighing those words. Finally, he inclined his head in a gesture of acknowledgement. "Then perhaps you are more than a mere human with dangerous tools." The next day, the skeptical clan formally invited Jake and his settlement's leaders to a gathering where they could discuss a more lasting alliance. This was a historic event, one that would bridge the gap between two factions once divided by fear and misunderstanding. The gathering was held under the open sky, with leaders from various Shelek clans in attendance. There, Jake shared his vision of a unified effort, where each group could contribute to the planet's future. Tensions still flickered under the surface, but a shared sense of purpose began to take root. The Shellac leaders watched as Jake demonstrated the uses of his tools in peaceful ways, crafting and mending items, fostering collaboration through small acts of repair and restoration. During one of his demonstrations, a Shellac child timidly approached Jake, holding a broken amulet. She looked up at him with hopeful eyes, and he gently took the item, using his tools to repair its delicate structure. The child beamed as Jake returned the amulet, the small act symbolizing a larger message of healing and cooperation. As the discussions concluded, the skeptical leader, now a tentative ally, stood and addressed his people. We have seen today that power lies not in the strength of one's tools, but in how they are used. This human has shown us that creation, not destruction, is the true purpose of his toolkit. Let us remember this lesson and move forward together. The final decision was made: the Shellac clans would join forces, each contributing resources, skills, and knowledge to build a new age of peace and mutual respect. As a gesture of trust, Jake gifted a simple toolkit to the skeptical clan leader, symbolizing his willingness to share not just tools, but a future. With the alliance secured, Jake returned to his settlement, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. He knew the journey wasn't over and that trust would need to be nurtured constantly. But for the first time, he felt that humanity had earned a place in this alien world, a place built on trust, resilience, and the quiet power of actions over words. As he watched the stars that night, Jake felt a sense of purpose solidify within him. The universe was vast, and every corner held potential allies and challenges. But here, on this remote world, he had built something lasting, a foundation that others could build upon. And that, he realized, was what it truly meant to wield power, not through force, but through connection, understanding, and the courage to lay down one's guard and reach across divides.